And now, more troubling news is coming out of Iran. A new report says that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Qods Force, a military branch that has been described as analogous to our CIA but terrorists, has seen itself up as the hub in a supply manufacturing network of military-grade drones or unmanned aerial vehicles. Though I'm surprised that our current military hasn't changed the name to unpersoned aerial vehicles. Anyway, you must be asking yourself, where are the parts for these drones coming from? And to whom are the Iranians supplying the drones? Well, according to this report, the Qods Force imported the materials to build these drones from none other than China, and then exported the finished product, deadly flying killing machines, to terror groups such as the Houthi rebels. This report was authored by the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the same group that brought to light Iran's secret nuclear facilities back in 2002. So joining us now to help break down that report is the Deputy Director of that council, the National Council of Resistance, Alireza Jafarzadeh. Thanks for joining us tonight. So in your latest press conference in Washington, D.C., you exposed a wealth of information about this UAV program of the Iranian regime. So talk to us more about some of your findings.
Thank you so much, Kara. Great to be on your show. Certainly in this press conference, we addressed three aspects of the UAV program of the Iranian regime. We dealt with the production, we dealt with the usage, and we also dealt with those training that is going to their proxies. First, we exposed 8 different sites in Iran that are now being used to produce either parts or the complete of those UAVs to send to their proxies in the region. These productions are done by the Ministry of Defense or the Revolutionary Guards, what they call the Aerospace Force of the Revolutionary Guards. We had maps and details, we had satellite imagery, we had personnel. We even showed like how some of these factories are disguised as like, benign looking companies, but in fact, they are a cover for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards to build these facilities. Second, we exposed 7 different sites that deal with the usage, whether it's storage or training their proxies to be able to use these destructive drones and kill people in the countries in the region. And third, we showed how the Qods Force of the Revolutionary Guards, which is the most notorious force within the Revolutionary Guards itself, was running the whole show. There are 3 different directorates within the Qods Force that are behind the whole UAV program of the Iranian regime. First, there is an intelligence director that determines what kind of drones they actually need for the mission they have, the country they want to send to, those mercenaries, and then they submit their orders to the Ministry of Defense to produce them. Then they have the logistics directorate that is responsible for smuggling these into the countries in the region like Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, and they use air, sea, and land to send them. And then third is the training directorate that is responsible for bringing their mercenaries, their recruits from those countries in the region into Iran, training them for terror operations, but also part of their training is to train them how to use these drones. And overall, we gave a complete picture of the UAV program of the Iran regime, something that no one had before.
You've done great work in this regard. So as far as you've been able to determine, why do you think Iran is investing so heavily into this drone program?
Well, the Iranian regime really agenda is to create mayhem and instability and chaos in the region. The cornerstone of their foreign policy since day one has been not to build relationships or peace or anything like that, rather exactly the opposite, to destabilize the region, to run their terror operation, terror network, recruit mercenaries in different parts of the world, whether it's the countries in the Middle East or even as far as in North Africa or even some Latin American countries. And this is exactly the same way they were doing what they're doing in Iran. They want to create fear among the population. In Iran, they kill people to stay in power. They do the same thing in the region. But the real purpose is just by creating these instability and fear, they can gain concessions. They can frighten those countries to give them what they actually want. They can frighten the Western countries, the United States, the European nations, or the countries in the region, so that they would give the Ayatollahs, giving them, concessions, money, resources they want, lifting the sanctions and all of those things. And I think that's why they're using drones. Now, drones are very, convenient way to serve their purpose, because it's a lot cheaper, it's easier to make, it's easier to train their proxies for it. Think about, comparing it with sending like airplanes to hit their targets in those countries. It's not even comparable. And that's why in the past few years, the Iranian regime has put a lot more emphasis on their drones as well as their missiles. Actually, the Revolutionary Guards has 5 forces. One of them used to be the Air Force. Now they have replaced the Air Force with what they call Airspace Force, meaning more emphasis on missiles, more emphasis on drones, and much less emphasis on the planes. And I think within that context, what we expose is a very important part of the Tehran's agenda that they're pursuing now in the region.
So far, since you've released your findings, what has the response been from the government here, and how do you think the U.S. government should be responding to Iran and to your findings?
Well, I think the U.S. government or the countries in the region, they should really immediately act upon this, because, as you said earlier, we have a track record and about all the other aspects of the Iran regime, whether it's their nuclear program, their terrorism, and all of that. And it was our revelation in August of 2002 about the nuclear sites in Natanz and Iraq that triggered for the first time the inspection of Iranian nuclear sites by the UN nuclear watchdog known as the IAEA. Now, in this case, there is no equivalent of IAEA overseeing, the drone activities. There's no real attention on this horrible network that the Iran regime is operating. That's why the U.S. should act immediately. They should, acknowledge it, first of all, make a public statement that the Iran regime's terror operations using drones must stop immediately. They need to sanction all of the entities that we mentioned here in our report, in our press conference. And not just that, I think we shouldn't just be limited to their UAV operations, because the Iranian threat is multilateral. You need to also address their missile program, their terror operations, and also their human rights violations inside the country, especially with the new president of the regime, Ebrahim Raisi. This administration needs to hold him accountable and making it very clear that everything that the regime does, they're going to be held accountable.
Thank you so much for all of your work in this regard, Alireza, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. And when we come back, it's time for our Tonight in History Spotlight. You won't want to miss it next.